Hello, and welcome to the first episode of my live talk podcast, the Entrepreneur and Leadership live podcast. And as it is in a live situation, my today's guest didn't show up. She apologized, and therefore I have to entertain you a little bit on my own today about the topics we had planned for today. Once more, welcome to this first episode. It's live streamed directly on YouTube, LinkedIn, and into my Facebook group, and as well the voice stream is going to Clubhouse. I think it's a quite interesting approach because then you can only listen to it via Clubhouse while ironing, running, or traveling somewhere, or you just go live on LinkedIn or on YouTube. Okay, the podcast will cover different topics like how to launch and to scale your business. That's one thing, how to do it and what to avoid. And I normally, and I want as well in the future, give you experience, what worked, what didn't work, what practical hacks and tips can entrepreneurs and business experts give you really to launch your business or scale it up further. And as well to align your vision to your values, internal values, and as well how to build a strategy and how a business model out of it. And today's guest normally would have been Natalie Veigh. She's a business expert in director of Center of Individual Performance, and she wants to talk about vision and values, how they are aligned. And therefore, let's talk a little bit about values. Why values, at least for me, are so important? Because it doesn't matter if I'm a leader, an employee, or start my own business. The values are the core thing I'm standing behind. It's my own individual culture, and I have to find those values as well within the company I'm working for, and as well the values have to be found in the company I'm launching or I'm running. And everything I'm doing shouldn't be against any of those values. It's kind of my moral system, what I'm standing for. And coming to vision, that's a very, very difficult thing. Normally as a company vision, you can say, like for me, I want to help millions of entrepreneurs within the next 10 years, really to find their idea, to launch their business, to create big results, wow effects for their dream customers. Okay, see, Natalie is coming now live. Therefore, we have a quick start. It's really live session, and therefore everything is going live. And if something happens there, it's like it is. Welcome. I'll let her in. We'll see. I'm switching over to Zoom here. Hold on. Hi, Natalie. We are already live in the live talk. It is as a live situation. It went as it went. No, we're live already. It means I just started, but I really repeated that a little bit. Today's guest, we change it, is Natalie Veigh. She's director from Eisner Empor, Center for Individual Performance. And to give you more in an overview what she's doing, I show a little bit her Forbes profile and give you more insights on that, because she's more or less working for the individual and organization performance of the family business excellence. Her previous roles include vice president, family dynamics, and Wells Fargo private banking partner in her own enterprise consulting in coaching practices. And she's focusing really on family-owned business and strategic design for learning. And I'm now very, very happy to welcome Natalie. Probably, Natalie, you give some more details about you, if you like, if I have to add something, because now we have kind of a running start within a live situation. Sorry for that, but...
Yeah, it's my apologies. We got hit by Hurricane Ida, and we had an electrician fixing our power today, and we did power. Yes,
but you're fine. You're fine. Everything is fine. You didn't.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we just had some challenges with our electric, so it's back now.
Okay.
So I'm a practitioner of neuroscience as well, and I work a lot with private companies. And so we're talking about values today. And so a lot of my experience and research with values is with small leadership teams, not small leadership teams that are close, that are accomplishing goals and moving forward. So I'm excited to finish our discussion, even though it started a little late.
No, it's a bumpy start, because I had the same problem last week. On last Thursday, my internet was down. I couldn't even I had even a mobile line, and therefore I couldn't do anything. And I had one day later had the internet back, and I think the Hurricane Ida is more. Hopefully nobody gets hurt there. That's, I think, the most important thing. And today's topic, I think, is a very important topic, especially for people who wants to launch and start their business, but as well for really old SMEs or old companies who are doing that for quite a while already, probably to think about what are their values as a leader on the one hand side, the values of the company, the culture of the company, and how you can align your vision. And probably just gives some details how you approach and how you would advise your clients what to do, how they find their values and how do they find their vision, for example.
I think you're right. Values for the leader of the organization really often set the culture. So for you and I, Michael, I know you're a solopreneur and I was for a while. So my values, I get to live in my company. I don't even think about why I'm doing what I'm doing. You've heard of Simon Sinek's, find your why. And so often we act out our values without examining them. And in fact, what we often examine is our behaviors or our beliefs, the things we articulate about what we do. And values really underpin them. So we have our values first, the things we hold dear, then our motivators in life, then our beliefs and our behaviors. So really getting clarity on what our values are and making sure they're our own values. So I'll use an example of myself. I grew up in a military family. One of the values is timeliness, right? But that's a value that the military has. It's not my own value. What I had to learn when I got older is I'm often late, unfortunately, which you've experienced today, but not usually because of internet issues. I'm usually late because I will stay in conversation with someone as long as it takes. So I won't be looking at my watch. I'll lose track of time. So I had to find out that my value wasn't about timeliness. It was about presence. So we need to first decide our external values that are first forced upon us and our real internal values, and then see how they're actualized. And it really did bother me a lot when I would realize that I was coming up against a value I thought I had. So that's really the first part of individual values. Now, group values are a little more challenging. When you have a company that are partners or a company that are run by siblings or you name it now, there are different ways of doing this. It's not enough that I have my values and you have yours, Michael. It's how they combine, that they work together. And the research says in families specifically, they have the same values. The difference is the order, though. Your number one, Michael, if we're siblings, might be my number 5. And that's where you and I are going to have values tension, because we're ordering them differently, not that we have opposite values, and the behavior will look as though we have different values.
Is in the end a kind of a question of the whole culture, because culture is incorporating common values, some personal values, definitely, and as well past experiences. They are somehow in your unconscious, in unconsciousness, and they are printing more or less the whole company culture. And it's probably as well the reason what you just mentioned there with family business. In the next generation, you have so much disputes because one is the first, and the second, the third, and then you get fights, and lots of family business don't survive to this second generation because this common value set wasn't defined and agreed upon. I think it's a very important thing. And sometimes it's even better you don't be in a company when you can't really stand behind the whole set of values, because some value where you have a high priority is against what you're standing for. That's exactly what happens sometimes in family companies. Yeah.
It's true. It happens in public companies too. I do a lot of assessment work, and one of the assessments that we have is aligned with the strategic vision and values. There are some of us that are not, for lack of a better phrase, company men. There are some of us who can't just walk over a value. And you're right, in families as well. And this is the part of when we think about company values, a lot of times we will make a really big list, and it's beautiful and it's lovely. It's hard to do, to really have many in common. Again, that research on common values, they say of about 15, 8 are the same. So what I encourage people to do is try to articulate 5 values and get really clear on what those 5 values are, in so much as it's what it is and what it is not. So people like to say trust and honesty, right? They say these really big phrases, but what does that really mean? So I encourage them to write on a sheet of paper like this, and I write what it is and what it is not. So honesty for one of my clients was, we give feedback immediately, so we don't wait. We tell the kind truth. Those were a lot of the things it is. And one of the things that it is not withholding information. It is not what's cordial hypocrisy. And cordial hypocrisy is when I'm doing this to you, but inside I'm doing this. So it had to be both what it is and what it is not, because what we do is we equivocate. We change the meaning of a word as things go on. So I use a silly example all the time. I just moved to New York. That's why I'm having these IDA issues. And I'll park out on the street and the sign says fine. And I park there. My neighbor says, why are you parking there? I said, well, the sign says fine for parking. My neighbor knows that fine means money I'm going to be charged. And all of us who have partners know that when our partner says fine, when we ask them how they're doing, it's anything but fine, right? So that's how this definition of a simple word is changed 3 times. My definition of honesty or transparency is going to be very different than yours, so that we're not operationally defining it differently. We get very clear on what it means, because the next step of values, besides creating them and communicating them, is holding ourselves accountable. So I can't hold you accountable to a moving target that we're both talking about differently. So usually when my clients come up with their values document, it'll be about this big, because if we try to laminate it, they can put it in their wallets and they have it on their desks. It'll just be 5 values, each one with the what it is and what it is not, trying to get at least 5 pieces underneath that, so that we really get our arms around that thing. Because you're right, as you said at the very beginning, and you said now, our values are the culture more than the mission statement and the vision. And if we get our values right, we can build an active mission and vision statement that are also actionable, that are not just pie in the sky ideas. And the research says, there's a great book called The Culture Code, that you need to communicate those things 10 times more than you think you do. They don't just stick with us. So we have to find ways to have conversations about whether it's honesty or transparency. And I try to get, people always want honesty and transparency, but then the rest should be action oriented. They should be things you're doing, not just an idea that's really ethereal.
That's, I think, what I want to interrupt you, or just to say something. I think values, if they're only not, you can't experience them, they're only kind of a theoretical thing, it's difficult. Even if you write them down, that doesn't mean anything. You have to live them and together. And therefore you have to understand under the words the same meaning. And better than understanding, you have to experience exactly that those values are really lived by. And therefore, I completely agree. There should be kind of actionable, touchable. If it's just an intangible value, it's very difficult. Everybody probably is understanding something different by the pure meaning of the word.
Yeah, so that brings me to how some of the values activities I do with the group are. With yourself, it's different. We do kind of a deep dive exploration. I'll give you questions and answers. But when I do it with a management team or an ownership team or a board, we actually gamify how we put together the values. And so it's really simple as you put it on a Dixie cup. You'll put all the values you think will be common, knowing that you're only going to choose 5, maybe 7. And then there's a rubber band with strings attached to it. As many people in the group who are there get to start putting them up. So when we put kindness as a value, and we're all trying to carry these Dixie cups and stack them, and you keep dropping it because you're a little slower than me, and I yell at you, get it together, Michael. Then we're testing what kindness feels like. Yeah. Is this being kind? Because that's what I mean about that aspirational values. We all say the things we think we're supposed to say, that we grew up hearing, like I said, timeliness for me, that nice stuff. So we test if it's true, and we test if you can feel it. And believe it or not, which is why the neuroscience helps, trust actually feels like something. There's a neurochemical reaction for trust.
You can experience it.
We will create that behavior. We can attach some biofeedback machines during this game to try to see how we are making these values practiced. And then usually after we, make the pyramid, which is silly, but there's usually a dialogue of what's on the bottom as the foundation and what's on the top. We'll start creating other assignments for this group to work on so that they can again actualize their values, and then they start testing it down the organization. Yeah. Because once you've felt it, you can talk about it. And in neuroscience, we say you have to name it to tame it. So what was that experience? How do we carry it forward?
For example, give an example. My example would be if you say one of the biggest values in company is mutual respect. Then you can measure it, for example, by one thing, if somebody is on time or not, because it's kind of disrespectful if you're late. There are always excuses. Then you can measure as well. You have to measure it somehow, those values, how you live by those standards. Or respect is that if you say you will provide these results by that day and in that quality, then you should do that. Means the accountability you can measure. Therefore, I'm quite a big fan, especially for value, to give some actionable, measurable results or objectives by it. Then it's probably much easier for people to understand how you define those values and how you can live by those values. And probably there's as well this discussion and what is an idyllic value and what is an actionable value. Probably you can shed a little bit light on that more.
Yeah, an idyllic value is a value I think I should have. And this one's about kindness, trust, and honesty. Like I said, of a group of 5, you want 1 or 2 of those because that says how we will be together. But conflict really in organizations about what we do, how we do it, or who we do it with. And so it helps you cover the how and the who. An actual value might be accountable that you're talking about, Michael. So we are an accountable company. What does accountability look like? Accountability is really front loaded. So you're right. It has to have specific metrics, and it also is responsible for you and I. When we become accountable to each other, we've really set those expectations clearly. So it's not me trying to catch you out when you've made a mistake. It's that we've worked hard enough to get it so that you can do it. So accountability is one, work ethic is another, or hardworking. And if you can quantify it, it's more actionable than not. Believe it or not, trust or transparency can be actionable as well if they're defined well. But we want to really make sure that, under what it is and what it is not, we can say it looks like, and then you can have a sentence with it. So if I'm honest with you, Michael, I'm constantly in conversation with you because miscommunication is one of the leading cause of change challenges in organizations, privately held or publicly held, is that we're not doing it well enough. So I think that's really the next step on the journey of values, is to figure out what the metrics are, as you said, and to figure out how we implement them in a way that's meaningful, that don't seem just punishments.
Exactly. I think it's it's not, if you set objectives, that doesn't mean you want to punish somebody, but if you say you promise a result, you should do it. It's called accountability, because if a team is relying on you because you bring this missing part and everybody's waiting for you, but you don't fulfill your promise, then there's a value issue, I would say. And I think these actionable values have a big advantage in daily life to prove that culture is working. But I agree as well, you can't put everything in actionable values. You have as well to put some idyllic values, like trust. How would you prove? How can you build trust as a leader? I mean, you have different approaches there. Probably just show how vulnerable you are. What did you wrong in the past? How did you manage to do that? Then you can build trust by that. And I think, as you mentioned it, communication, because business is all about relationship. Be it relation to your employees, be it relation to your funding partners, be it to your customers. It's just relationship management. And you have to talk, you have to communicate, emotional communication, and as well the logical communication. You have to do both. And to build trust, it has to be authentic, what you're saying, what you're talking, what you're doing, everything. What you do is as well communication. And therefore, this miscommunication is probably one of the biggest issue in most of business. Definitely, to build trust, to keep trust, and not to lose trust.
Interestingly enough, in the research of trust, there are three things that are really important. There's sincerity, that I genuinely want to do this and you believe me. There's reliability, that I can continue to do it and do it well. And then there's competence, because you might have the most sincere and reliable person ever, but they're doing something out of their skill level. And so when you break it down to those three components, and this is the most important part, the research shows that giving trust is more important. We often think, I'll trust you when you prove it. The research says when you start acting as though I'm trustworthy, I will start being trustworthy, and so will you. And so we can help actualize trust, as you said. That's the thing, is when the client decides their values, and I don't come in deciding them, even though there's some that might make organizations really healthy that I've seen in the past. They have to come up with their 5 and whittle them down, which, believe it or not, in a group of more than even the two of us, Michael, it would take us a while. We wouldn't have the same 5 we're picking together. And then we're building our tower. Then we have discussions of, maybe it shouldn't be kindness, because maybe we are all actually competitive. Because sometimes people put in competition, kindness or collaboration, because they're trying to say we don't want to be competitive. But then we have to realize, okay, we're all competitive. So let's not pretend that. Let's find opportunities for everyone to win. Competition that's helpful. So they sometimes change the 5 based on the activity we do. And then we start teaching based on other clients' experience and their own experience of what the components are for each value, to then get them to taste it, feel it, and turn it into behaviors that are actualized. Transparency might not be an idyllic value per se, because when I think of idyllic values, I mean values you can't do. But it's not as actionable. It's not as something you can get your hands around. So we try to make them all actionable, but at least 2 have to do with the way we behave with one another, our own internal interests. Usually the other 3 are externalized, because that's our culture components. It's both what others think of us and how we actually interface.
But you mentioned transparency. I think that's a very huge value, because if you have to find decisions, and if you don't put the information transparent to those who should do the information, then you have a big issue. Probably you won't do the best decision. And as well, if you're doing this trust combined with transparency, that you would then delegate the decision to those who have the best information to decide on. That doesn't mean that has to be the leader. It can as well be the guy talking with the customer. And companies have to learn to place the decision power to those with the best information, not with the highest hierarchy. And it's a combination of transparency and trust there. I mean, it's both working brilliantly together.
Yeah, that actually results in decision making, right? That results in action. And so if you think of each value as a component of what we're trying to get to, which is how it informs our vision and mission, and that's really important. I think the other thing to consider is the timing of this. A lot of people are trying to do values quickly because they know they need a value statement. And the work really is in the room. I've done half day or 2-day sessions getting this right. And I think that values, vision, mission, those are things that are really driving everything in the organization. Yeah. And so taking the appropriate time to do it, not farming it out to the person on the team who's, John's such a good writer. We'll just have John do a draft for us. It's not going to work that way. You really need to get in. This is the work of what's going to be that culture, that glue going forward. And so I encourage people to spend as long as it takes. Now, it shouldn't take longer than a 2-day session. I don't mean you're sitting together for 48 hours, but you might talk in the morning, go to lunch, come back, because we want to practice them. So even if it's a half day, we do 2 hours one day, sleep on it, because that's how our brains integrate, and we'll have questions. And then 2 hours the next day is to really make them tangible. And you say, well, we already have values. The question is, values can change, even in our own individual life. If a divorce happens, if we have children, if something else large happens, my own individual values will change, although they don't change all the time. Organizational values change, especially around transition, because like I gave the example of Michael and myself, we kind of create our company's values as independent practitioners the moment we're in there. So the moment you have a strong leadership change, that is, I'm a CEO and I bring a COO in, or a CFO, now the values have changed because it's 3 of us. And if it's 10 years later and they're different people, we need to revisit the values as well.
Exactly. I think everything is evolving, means your personal values evolving as well over time, because you get new experience over time that has an impact on your values, and it's life. Life is constant change and development, or evolution, call it evolution. The same happens with values, means values evolve over time. And what you said before, just writing down value statements, vision statements, I think there's no point in it, writing them down and filing them. You have to live them. Yeah, you have to prove them that you really live by those values, and you align your vision as well to the values you're standing for. That as well. I mean, you have a brilliant vision, like saving the whole world, but it's not your intrinsic value, then you have a problem with that. And how would you advise people? How can they align their vision to these values?
Yeah, so I think when we get at least 5 values, I encourage people to get 5. 8 is great. Yeah. Is to, the values are why we do it. The mission is usually, the vision is what we do, and the mission is how we do it. Yeah. And so the question is this the piece that's informing the next document? And like Michael said, you can hire a consultant to write them for you, or have an employee write it for you, and it's going to look beautiful and it's going to sit in a desk. You are not going to know what it says. So the executive team co-creating it is really important to test it on. So I think the best way to get there is to say, okay, now we know why we do what we do. The question is what we want to do, which I think most people are clear on, right? That's why the mission doesn't change that much. And now how are we going to do it? How are we going these things done? Is it, it's excellent customer service? We're going to be the most timely. What is it that we're doing through the document? And that's where you want to start tweaking. And you will likely see, at least one of these actionable values in your vision or mission statement, if not more. not just putting them in there like a word search, but really because this is so important to us. So transparency is really important to everyone now, whether it's for ESG, transparency in your supply chain. COVID, transparency was the most important thing. The people who retained employees who wanted to retain them, of course, there were a lot of reduction in forces. The one thing that was different, not that they didn't get pay cuts or a lack of pay rises or a lack of bonuses, is they had transparent communication about why. And that's so important, believe it or not, because people think it is the bonus, it's everything else. And so that's why having these values reflected in our vision and mission are important. So once you get the values done, I would take a hard look at your vision and your mission and say, do these values help us get to where we say we're going in these documents? And if they don't, we need to relook at the path, because they're the vision and the mission are the GPS for how we get somewhere. And the values are like the car we're going to take. And so if I decided a GPS route that's off-road and I'm driving a Toyota Corolla, it's not going to work. So we need to make sure that path for the vehicle really match. So
it's kind of a toolbox. I think the vision is the direction you want to go. The mission is you taking this Toyota Corolla, and the values or this is your tool set could change over time. I mean, sometimes by value you're taking this tool, then that tool, but you never lose your vision. Means that's your big North Star which you are trying to chase. And I agree. That's, I think, how you should do that. But it's difficult as well, especially with this transparency issue. Means if you look at companies who are not clear now, especially you mentioned COVID. Look, like most of the communication is now virtual. You're inviting people in your own living room, if you like, and you have to do completely as a leader. If you need other tool set how to lead, but to do that correctly, to help your team, to coach it, to be supportive for the well-being of your staff, of your team, you have to be should be able to contact you. And with this virtual working, it's so much more difficult, and therefore you need as a leader to have an open call me policy and ask if the children are running through the screen or through a video. Ask them what the school day was. How do they manage this tough situation? Because as in a team, they are working for this company maybe, but they have as well a private life, and that has to be harmonious. Means you have to be. That's exactly probably this value, trust and transparency, what you're doing, and in both sides, and how you can achieve the best result for everybody. It's a win-win. It should be a win-win for everybody. And COVID showed that. Means companies who didn't do that had trouble.
Yeah, and I think the one thing I would add to that, you're 100% correct, is not just saying call me, but you pick up the phone as the leader and call someone randomly. Yeah. Because what we're often saying when we do talk about COVID, most of us were saying and still are saying, we're doing as much as we can. We're working, we're burning the midnight oil. We're subliminally sending messages to our team that I'm so busy. And so our team who's trying to support us is like, well, I'm not going to bother them. So you're right. Say, call me a lot, but then also randomly pick up the phone, even if you only have 15 minutes. And like you said, just to check on them, even if it's not about business, because we're also checking in when things are going wrong. And that can erode the culture and our values, because maybe one of our values is kindness. Maybe that was the one that was there, or it's collaboration. Yeah. But if I'm only calling you when you've made mistakes, that's not collaborative or kind.
No, it's just if you just look only at performance, it doesn't work. Means you have as well to give the best possible conditions that somebody can perform, and only to measure the performance doesn't value the performance at all, because it's a human being. Coming back to the problem of the basic, of the fundamental, it's a relationship, a trustworthy relationship. If that basic values are not understood, then what are you doing as a company? Is it a machine, and the resources, like people, are just a resource, like another machine? Okay, then that's probably not the future world, I guess. Yeah, especially in a world of disruptive change. And face it, COVID, every crisis, nothing else than an accelerator of change. What was obvious now is COVID, that digitalization is a trend 20 years old. Those companies who didn't do digitization had a problem. Those who did, they are working wonderfully. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think there are some wonderful things about not COVID specifically, but the type of crisis that you're talking about that forces us to do the thing that we know is already there, but we haven't yet had a chance to execute on. And I do think, we've been talking about trust as a buzzword for at least 10 years in organizations. I think because we've had to learn to meet our employees and our colleagues in different ways, we're actually getting to that trust piece where you had started saying that trust has to do with vulnerability. I think that that's true. We're actually coming on that cusp in a real way, even though it's been the term du jour for a while because of this change. Mm-hmm. And that's the hopeful part of this. It's also the right time to look at those vision, mission, values, because if the world is changing and those things are not changing, even for my clients, I have some multi-100-year-old companies, which is lovely. And you want to mix legacy with innovation to succeed. But if we're at a time of change right now and you haven't changed your documents at all, either you're the most impeccable fortune tellers I've ever met, or you're just not considering reality right now. So it's apt time to start making these changes if you haven't already.
Yeah. And therefore, just because we are already nearly 40 minutes, what would your advice for people who start their business as well, for running business? What should they do now in terms of tuning or fine-tuning their values and their vision? What would be your best advice you can give them?
I would encourage them to find a facilitator or a coach who specializes in this. And there are many, Michael. I'm sure you could give them a list. I could give them a list, because values, and I said this at the beginning, it's the thing that we hold most dear. It is the thing I care the most about. And therefore, the conversation about it is going to be really tough. And I don't mean tough as we will fight, although sometimes people do. It's going to be tough for me and you to have an honest conversation, because two-person relationships are inherently unstable. They're called dyads. It's why we tend to gossip. It's why we tend to bring other people in. So that facilitator is a neutral third party, even if that helps just alleviate some of this, is allowed to rephrase it. They can do the work of keeping the room safe so that you all can do the work of being really honest with each other. Because those fake values, those idyllic values, or those values that I'm saying yes to because I know you really like them, Michael, because I've known you for a long time, those aren't going to work. So that would be my first step, is really have someone. And if it's just you, you can do it with a therapist. You can also do it with a coach. But for your team, I think it's important to have that facilitated, because there's just some things that we don't do well with one another because we care so much about each other, believe it or not. I'm not lying to you that, I say I like black and I actually like blue because I hate you. I'm doing it because I don't want to offend you because you're wearing the opposite color. And that's, I think, the thing that people really need to understand is we often hurt people when we're trying to avoid them, and facilitation can help.
That's a brilliant tips, and very, very valuable, because it's a question as well of your own personal mindset. I mean, you have to find your values, and that is defining as well. Then it helps you to get a much more better growth mindset, to develop yourself and to get to things out of your comfort zone and so on. Where can people find you? Because I'm just put in on your page. You can't see it, I know, because it's now a live stream to LinkedIn, on more or less on LinkedIn, Twitter, and you have as well a web page as well where they can find you.
Yeah, so I work at EisnerAmper, EisnerAmper.com.
I placed it on the stream. Yeah, you can't see it. It's because you're coming from Zoom.
Yes, so my website, my LinkedIn, my Twitter, all of those ways to contact me. Happy to chat values or at any time.
Yeah. Okay, then I would say thank you very much, Natalie. It was really fun. Time is flying talking to you about this very important, I think, very important issue and topic. Because without values, you can't even have a vision, to be honest, which you can achieve at least. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike. Thanks for your patience.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.